Nvidia's new RTX 5080 laptop GPU obviously beats their older RTX 4080 from last gen. But by how much? And is the 5080 worth paying more for? I've compared both laptop GPUs in 25 games at 3 resolutions to show you all the differences. The newer RTX 5080 laptop GPU only has 3% more CUDA, Tensor, and RT cores compared to the older RTX 4080 laptop GPU. The 5080 has an extra 4 gigs of VRAM, or 33% more memory capacity, and it's also faster GDDR7 with a bigger memory interface. Max clock speeds are similar, but the 4080 has a wider power limit range, so you might be more likely to also find it in thinner and lighter designs running with less power. More power equals more performance. This graph shows the 3D Mark TimeSpy graphics score from each GPU at different power levels, and the 5080 in purple wasn't really that much higher than the 4080 in red. With both running at 80 watts, the 5080 was only scoring 7% higher than the 4080, but with both running at their max 175 watt limit, the 5080 was scoring 11% higher. But yeah, this absolutely means that a higher powered 4080 could beat a lower powered 5080. It all comes down to power limits when we're comparing laptops. Laptops with these specs are not cheap, so if we find any good deals on either of these GPUs, we'll add them to our gaminglaptop.deals website so you can save money. Check it out with that link below. To do this testing, I'm using Lenovo's Legion Pro 7i for the RTX 4080 and XMG's Neo 16 for the RTX 5080, and both laptops run their GPUs at the full 175 watt power limit, which is how I've done this testing. And the 5080 is also paired with a faster CPU and faster RAM, which isn't ideal for an apples to apples GPU comparison, but it also kinda just is what it is, because newer laptops with RTX 50 series GPUs just come bundled with newer CPUs and RAM. The 5080 laptop in purple used less power when measuring both at the wall with the charger connected. In 3 maxed out games at 4K, the older 4080 used anywhere between 5 to 16% more power. Actually, the 4080 laptop was paired with a 300 watt charger, so it looks like it was constantly maxed out. This means the 5080 is better in terms of performance per watt, which is just how many frames in a game it can deliver per watt of power consumed. Because not only does the 5080 hit higher FPS, as you'll see soon, but it's able to do so while using less power. It's not really fair to compare temperatures here, as both laptops have different cooling designs, but we're far from thermal throttling and there wasn't much difference. My 4080 laptop was reaching higher clock speeds than the 5080, despite Nvidia's spec sheet saying they should be similar, and I made sure the default overclock on the Legion was off. These are stock results. Both GPUs are rated for up to 175 watts, and I found them both to run at a similar TGP in these games. As for the games, Cyberpunk 2077 had one of the biggest differences in favor of the 5080, with the 5080 reaching an 18% higher average FPS at 1440p, a typical resolution for laptops with this tier of hardware. The performance difference gets smaller if we turn on ray tracing and DLSS upscaling. The 5080 wasn't far from the 60 FPS sweet spot at 4K, but the 4080 really isn't far behind. Black Myth Wukong was just 8% faster on the 5080 at 1440p, which is only like 5 FPS. So yeah, not an amazing generational improvement after more than 2 years. There's a bigger gap with ray tracing and DLSS enabled though, with the 5080 now almost 14% faster at 1440p, and a much bigger gap in the 1% lows. Though I suspect that may be more due to the CPU differences between the laptops than the GPUs. That said, in Hogwarts Legacy, I ended up getting higher 1% low results on the older CPU and GPU at all 3 resolutions. I double checked the results and could reproduce them. I suspect it's due to the Legion CPU being able to use more power. The Last of Us Part 2 was reaching a 12% higher average FPS with the 5080 at 1080p, and 15% higher at 1440p, both of which are above average gains out of the games tested. At 4K, the 5080 had its biggest win over the 4080 out of all 25 games tested, with a 23% higher average FPS, where the 5080 was able to maintain above 60 FPS without upscaling. I'm playing through Assassin's Creed Shadows at the moment, and not gonna lie, it's a bit boring so far, but the 5080 was 10% faster than the 4080 at 1440p, though that's only a 5 FPS lead. Some games like Red Dead Redemption 2 are just weird. I'm pretty sure there's a bug in this game when it comes to RTX 50 GPUs paired with Intel CPUs. GPUs, because I've seen poor performance on more than 5 laptops now, and it doesn't happen with AMD CPUs. Anyway, Nvidia's RTX 50 drivers needing work isn't a reason to ignore the game, but this is one of the few where the 4080 was better. Strangely, Baldur's Gate 3 was better in average FPS at 1080p and 1440p too, but given this game seems to care more about the processor at lower resolutions, I was expecting to see a big win with the 5080, but that wasn't the case. I suspect this is due to the Legion laptop being able to run its CPU up to a higher power limit. Marvel's Spiderman 2, on the other hand, saw some of the biggest improvements with the 5080, but I suspect a lot of this is due to the CPU difference. Although that makes it kind of annoying to fairly test the GPUs, it's still a real-world difference that's going to exist between most 4080 and 5080 laptops. And the difference is even bigger with ray tracing enabled. For some reason, the 4080 just chokes at 4K, despite having VRAM still available, but for whatever reason, it clearly can't handle it. Instead of wasting your time individually talking through the rest of the 17 games tested, I'm just going to quickly skip through the rest of the results on screen now, so feel free to pause the video if you want to take a closer look at any specific game. The reason I test so many games is so that we can get a much more accurate average result from a wider selection of games, which then allows us to draw a better conclusion. In other words, more data equals more better. Let's take a look at the average differences next. On average, over all 25 games tested, at 1080p, the RTX 5080 laptop GPU was almost 9% faster compared to the RTX 4080 laptop GPU. Some games ran a little better on the older hardware, which doesn't really make sense to me, but I confirmed the results. And even if we ignore them, the 5080 still isn't that much better than the 4080 in most cases. Stepping up to the higher 1440p resolution, and the 5080 was now almost 10% faster on average. Higher resolutions are more GPU bound, and do a better job of hiding other factors between the laptops, like the CPU and RAM differences. At 4K, the 5080 laptop was almost 16% faster compared to the 4080, but it's being held up by the Spiderman 2 outlier. It's a valid result, but if you want to rule it out as a one-off issue, then the 5080 is still about 12% faster compared to the 4080. Here's how things look if we average the FPS from all 25 games together. This makes it really easy to see the differences. Yeah, the 5080 is better, but it's not really that far ahead. I was expecting a bigger difference from the 5080 given it came out 2 years after the 4080. It almost seems more like a 4080 Ti. I guess technically a bigger difference might be possible if we count Nvidia's multi-frame generation, which of course is one of their biggest selling points for the RTX 50 series. But I think they've overhyped it a bit and used it to mislead people with dodgy graphs. Only the newer RTX 50 series has access to the new multi-frame generation feature, which basically just means it can generate more AI frames than the 4080. Both laptops can use FrameGen in the 2x mode, where one frame is generated for each real frame, but with multi-frame gen, the 5080 can also use 3x mode, where 2 frames are generated per one real frame, or the 4x mode, where 3 frames are generated per one real frame. Look, I think frame generation is a useful feature when used correctly, and according to this investigation by Tim from Hardware Unboxed, that includes single-player games that aren't latency sensitive, with a base frame rate of 70 to 80 FPS prior to generating frames. And most of the games that I personally play fall into that bucket. So when I play games on my own computer, yeah, I turn frame generation on and I don't think about it. For me, it offers a better experience compared to not using it. But at the end of the day, it's simply not fair to try and do an apples-to-apples comparison against AI-generated frames and rasterized frames, and pretend that the two are equal and frame generation is giving us a fair FPS boost. The visual quality and latency aren't the same for one thing. Not to mention that both of these laptop GPUs can even run modern games at 4K with just regular DLSS upscaling, so I wouldn't say multi-frame generation is a must-have anyway. If you really want to generate frames, you can still use multi-frame gen 2x mode on the 4080. What I think may make the 5080 more attractive is the price difference. Now, prices of both will of course change over time, so check those links below the video for updates and to see if there are current sales. Because if gaming laptops with either of these GPUs have a good sale, we'll be sure to add them to our gaminglaptop.deals website. We update that every day to include all the best sales, so make sure that you check it out regularly to save money on your next gaming laptop with that link below. Right now, in late July 2025, it's quite difficult to actually buy an RTX 4080 laptop. It seems like Nvidia stopped making the GPUs, so Best Buy doesn't have have many options in stock. This MSI Vector they've got with a garbage screen has gone on sale for less than $1,500 in the past. And you used to be able to get a solid 4080 laptop from $1,800 to $2,000 on sale, but apparently not anymore. Meanwhile, laptops with a 5080 start from $2,500 right now, so a fair bit more expensive than what 4080s were available for in the past. But perhaps not anymore if you can't actually find reasonably priced 4080s. The cheapest 5080 deal we've had on the GamingLaptop.deal site so far was for an HP Omen Max 16 for $1,936. And in terms of cost per frame value, that was very competitive and offered similar value to a 4080 laptop for $1,800, while a full-priced 5080 just isn't as good value to what the 4080 used to be available for. So if you're buying right now, the 5080 kind of wins by default given it's all you can really buy anymore, which kind of makes this video feel a bit pointless, but I think it's still important to see what the generational uplifts are between two GPUs in the same 80 series class. If you've already got a 4080, I really don't think there's any point upgrading to a 5080, unless you really need the extra 4 gigs of VRAM or you care about multi-frame generation. Fact is, what you have should still work quite well for some years to come. But what about RTX 5090 laptops? Before you empty your bank account, see how the 5090 compares against the 5080 next. I'll see you over in that one.